All right, let's dive right in. Today we're talking about neural networks. This is the amazing technology that's really at the heart of modern AI. If you've ever wondered how a machine can seem to, think, then you are in exactly the right place. So let's just kick things off with this huge question. What if a computer could actually learn, not by being programmed for every little thing, but by copying the way our own brains work? That one single idea? That's the key to everything we're about to get into.
And this leads us straight to our first big concept. You see, at their core, neural networks are inspired by the most incredible machine we know of, the human brain. We're pretty much trying to build a brain for our computers.
And here you can see that basic idea in action. On one side, you've got the biological brain, with its billions and billions of neurons. And on the other, its digital cousin, the artificial neural network, or ANN. These networks use all these interconnected points, or nodes, to try and copy the brain's amazing knack for spotting patterns and solving problems.
So let's just put a simple definition on it. An artificial neural network is a computer system made of these interconnected nodes. It's not a physical brain, of course, but it's a model that learns by seeing examples over and over again, instead of having someone write code for every single rule.
And the basic structure is actually pretty straightforward. First, you've got an input layer, which is just where the data comes in. Then you have one or more hidden layers. This is where all the heavy lifting and the real thinking happens. And finally, there's an output layer, which spits out the final answer. The data just flows right through, from input to output, one step at a time.
Okay, so that's the big picture of the network. But what about the little pieces that make it all work? Let's zoom way in on just one of those nodes. You can also call it an artificial neuron, which is really just a tiny little decision maker.
Yeah, the best way to picture a node is just as a mini decision maker. It takes in a bunch of different pieces of information, it weighs how important each one is, does a super quick calculation, and then passes its simple little answer on to the next node in the line.
So what's actually inside this little decision maker? Well, it's got four main parts. You have the input data, obviously. Then you have weights, and listen, these are incredibly important. They tell the node how much each piece of input should matter. Then there's something called a bias, which is kind of like a minimum bar the node has to clear before it fires. And then, of course, you've got the output it sends off to the next layer. Now, I know this all sounds a little abstract, right? So let's make it super concrete with a fun, practical example. Let's imagine one single node has to make a very, very important decision for us. And that all-important decision is, should we go surfing? Our little node is going to look at a few key things and give us a simple yes or no.
Okay, let's look at our inputs. We've got three factors. First up, are the waves good? Yes, absolutely, so we'll give that a value of 1. Is the lineup empty? Unfortunately, no, it's crowded, so that gets a 0. And is it shark-free? Thankfully, yes it is, so that's a 1. Now, we give each one a weight based on how much it matters to us. Good waves are critical, so that gets a high weight of 5. Crowds are a bummer but not a deal breaker, so that gets a 2. And sharks? Yeah, that's definitely important, so that gets a weight of 4.
All right, time for our little node to do its math. First, it takes the good waves value, which is 1, and multiplies it by that importance weight of 5. So that gives us a score of 5. Easy enough.
Next up, the lineup. The value is 0 since it's crowded. Multiply that by its weight of 2, and that's just 0. So our running total is still 5.
And finally, the shark factor. We have a value of 1 times its weight of 4, which gives us 4. We add that to our running total of 5, and now we're at 9.
But wait, there's one last little step. We subtract the bias, or the threshold. Just think of this as the bare minimum level of stoke we need to even bother putting on a wetsuit. For us, that threshold is 3. So we take our total of 9 and we subtract 3.
And that leaves us with a final score of 6.
And since 6 is greater than 0, the node activates. It fires off a 1, which means, yep, we're going surfing. If that final number had been 0 or negative, the node would have output a 0 and we'd be staying home. It's really as simple as that.
So that's how one single node makes one little decision. But the real magic, the part that's changing the world, is what happens when you connect millions of these nodes together and let the whole network learn and get better over time. See, the key to all of this is that these networks are not static. They are built to learn from data. They don't start out knowing anything. You have to feed them thousands, sometimes millions of examples so they can learn from their mistakes and slowly but surely get more accurate. So how does that learning actually happen?
Well, it's basically a four-step loop. Step 1, we feed it a ton of labeled data. Pictures that are already tagged cat or dog. This is what's called supervised learning. Step 2, the network makes a guess, and we measure how wrong it was using something called a cost function. Just think of it as an error score. The higher the number, the worse the guess. Step 3, the network then tweaks all of its internal weights just a tiny bit to try and lower that error score. A popular way to do this is called gradient descent, which is just a clever way of nudging the weights in the right direction. And finally, you just repeat this whole cycle, over and over, millions of times, with the network getting just a little bit smarter with every single loop.
And this quote right here sums it all up perfectly. The entire mission, the whole point of training a neural network, is to get that cost function, that error score, as close to zero as you possibly can. The lower the error, the smarter and more accurate your network is.
But here's the thing. The simple network we've been talking about is really just the beginning. The real power comes from specialized types of networks that are built for very specific jobs.
For example, on one hand, you have what are called convolutional neural networks, or CNNs. These guys are absolute masters of anything visual. They're amazing for stuff like facial recognition or identifying objects in a photo. And then on the other hand, you have recurrent neural networks, or RNNs. These are cool because they have feedback loops, which basically give them a kind of memory. And that makes them perfect for anything that happens in a sequence, like understanding a sentence or even forecasting sales data.
And that really brings us to our final thought here. We've gone all the way from a super simple should we go surfing decision to these incredibly complex networks that can see the world and even predict the future. So if this is what they can do today, it really makes you wonder, what on